Ranil Singh was my older brother. Yes, he's not coming back, but there's a lot of people out there that misses him.
While we absolutely need to stay focused on Officer Singh's service and sacrifice, we can't ignore the fact that this could have been preventable.
Is this California police officer dead because of the state's wall of sanctuary around this suspected illegal immigrant? The head sheriff in the case says yes. Democrats behind California's sanctuary law say no. What does former acting ICE chief Tom Homan say? He's here. And speaking of California Democrats, where Nancy Pelosi is choosing to ride out this shutdown has critics lashing out. Is there any end to the shutdown in sight? And is there any end to the Russia probe in sight? Former Whitewater independent counsel Ken Starr telling us when he sees Bob Mueller wrapping things up and what, if anything, is heading President Trump's way. And how about this? Up arrows for stocks this week as investors get ready to close out a brutal month and a very volatile year. What is ahead in the new year? Why our market pros are ready to ring in 2019. Cavuto Live, ringing in right now. And with one trading day left of the year, investors saying good riddance to 2018 with stocks suffering the worst year since the financial crisis. Good morning, everybody. I'm David Asman in for Neil Cavuto. To Fox Business Network, Susan Lee on all the ups and downs. There were a lot of them.
Oh,
Susan.
you bet, David. So a turbulent week in the markets as we close out a shaky December. Monday saw a record loss on Christmas Eve day, worst in the Dow's history. And then just a few days later, guess what? Wednesday saw a record 1,000-point gain for the Dow. That is what we call volatility. And then we had an 850-point swing on Thursday, top and tail end, which is the biggest intraday swing that we've seen since 2008. And don't forget, December, as we close it out, one more half session left. It's going to be the sixth worst December since 1931. So it's a caution to investors, these volatile times, not for the faint of heart. And you better strap in for these big moves up and also big moves down. Now, Monday, as I mentioned to you, final trading day of 2018, and barring a huge rally, which isn't expected to happen, we're looking at the worst year for the market since 2008. And you're probably wondering what's causing all this volatility and anxiety. Four major issues on the table right now. First, let's get to higher interest rates in the Federal Reserve. We know President Trump has been very vocal about his unhappiness with the Fed Chair Jerome Powell and the rate hikes. We did have some good news to end off this week with reports that they might be meeting face to face to try to work out their differences. Second concern for investors, global growth concerns. We have a sharp slowdown taking place in China, Europe looking shaky once again, and another headache for investors, ongoing trade tensions, namely with China. But with the U.S. delegation heading to Beijing the first week of January, we might get some positive developments on that front. And finally, falling oil prices, once again, great for consumers, as we know at the pump, bad for energy companies, which make up around 8 to 9% of U.S. benchmarks. But keep in mind, we are still in the longest bull market run in history and the second longest economic expansion on record, David. So you have to keep in the positives with the negatives.
That is a very important point to keep in mind. Yeah. Thank you, Susan. Well, what's in store for investors as we close out 2018? Founder of MaxFunds.com, Jonas Max Ferris, Forbes media editor-in-chief Steve Forbes, Fox News contributor Gary B. Smith, and Susan Lee is going to be joining us as well. So, Steve, first of all, are you worried? I mean, you've seen a lot of ups and downs in the markets over the years as head of Forbes. What do you think?
Well, I think what we see unfolding here, David, is not the economy, which is good, but uncertainty about what's going to happen, especially on the trade front, even more than the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve had indicated a year ago it was going to have these rate hikes, so the markets had plenty of time to absorb that news. But in terms of a trade, we have an agreement with Mexico and Canada. Will Congress go along with it, or is that going to get upended? Huge supply chains are in jeopardy now. China, the big one, can get a real deal there. Ultimately, I think we will, but the markets don't know. That's hurting investment. Uncertainty hurts investment. That's what's going to hang over the economy next year. Well, market is worried.
Jonas, if we do get a deal with China, just that alone, would that change the market sentiment? I mean, we did have an up week last week, but generally speaking, there have been some concerns. It has come down quite a bit in the past couple of months.
It would be a positive, but I don't think it was a huge negative in the first place. I mean, until very recently, through all this trade negotiation, our market was doing very well. In fact, over the last 2 years, it's up. And in fact, this is the worst year since the financial crisis. It shows you how many good years we've had since the financial crisis. These are single-digit drops. Pretty ordinary bad year in the grand scheme of the stock market. I think there's bigger problems in tech stocks than there are in trade-related stocks at this point. I'm not saying it's good for the stock market that we're on the edge of an escalating trade war, but I think to Steve's point, the interest rate move might have actually been too high in light of how weak the rest of the world is. If there was a stronger global economy,
which is what the president
if
said
the
a
other
couple of
countries were
months
like
ago.
us right now, we could probably handle even 3% rates, but we probably can't, given that it's not that strong.
And we're looking at a moderating growth picture as well, with GDP expected to come down to over 2%. So it makes the markets wonder why you're still raising interest rates at this point when there really isn't that much inflation. But wouldn't you characterize the last few trading days of December 2018 very typical of low volume, late cycle? That late cycle meaning we've been in this expansion for over 10 years.
We should mention, by the way, a very simple fact, too. A lot of these professional money managers have gone out on vacation. They made a lot of money in the last year. They went on vacation. That leaves retail investors like you and me out there who tend to panic a little more easily than these seasoned investors. But Gary B., a guy who I've never known to panic at all, there's been a lot of bad news, and that does affect investors. I mean, you name it. We just had the Sears news yesterday. They probably won't make it. They're going to probably be liquidated. We'll talk about that later. But China, as Steve mentioned, the government shutdown. Sometimes this bad news does infect Wall Street and affect investors, no?
Yeah, no, exactly. I'll give you, Susan kicked off the segment naming kind of 4 things to worry about. We haven't even touched on Brexit. I don't think we mentioned the Mueller investigation. Of course, the Democrats are already saying they're going to investigate Trump on everything from his tax returns to, I'm sure, his golf handicap. So, we have a lot more things to worry about. And what happens is, you're absolutely right. If it bleeds, it leads. I guess the old headline, from your print days, David. The media loves the bad news. Market fell, this much and that much. It tends to become almost self-fulfilling, especially people at the high end, that wealth effect. Even though they're making good money and they can afford maybe a bigger house, they say, wait a second, I don't feel so wealthy, and they stop spending less. Yeah. Mitigating that, of course, I think, as a couple people mentioned, the economy is in good shape. We rarely enter a recession when we see this low unemployment, GDP growth. So I get this point, with the market down so much, I would tend to be just maybe slightly more bullish, just because it just seems all so bad. That's probably a good time to wade in a little bit.
Well, Steve, I got a little nervous this week. I called a friend who's a money manager. He said, nobody can convince me that what could be coming in this economy is going to be any worse than anything we've faced before and gotten through. So if you're in, at least for a couple of years in the market, maybe if you're a day trader, you're in trouble. But if you're in for a couple of years, we'll get through this no matter what happens, right?
Yes, but the only question is, when will we get through it? What is going to happen on the trade front? And the thing about a trade war, David, is we should have learned from the 1930s. It infects the whole economy, not just those actively involved in trade.
But we're not there yet, are we?
Not there yet. This is more like a border skirmish. And that's why the market really hasn't tanked like it did in the 1929, 1930s.
But wouldn't you say markets react more to psyches rather than economics, as Jamie Dimon said at JP Morgan?
If you have a good economy, it's amazing how emotions are overridden. Emotions often lag the market. How many people in 2008, March, April of 2008, when the market had gone down 54%, one of the worst, most savage bear markets in history, who thought the market would rapidly turn around and go on a 10-year upswing? Right. Nobody.
But Jonas, we do have a good economy. I mean, the jobs numbers are extraordinary, the best that I've seen in my life in some cases. Christmas sales were very good. So will the economy be strong enough to withstand some of these slings and arrows?
Compared to the last 10 years, you can say it's a great economy in hindsight. But there was a great economy in 2000, and there was a pretty good economy in 2007. And that's kind of this this seesaw we're in right now. You don't really know if this is going to be a really good buying opportunity like 2011 was, when we had the 20% decline roughly, with mostly from foreign stocks. And then like 1998, when we had the Russian debt default. That was a good buying opportunity. We had another couple of years of big market return. So there's a greed element that could kick in too, even though there's a panic element going on right now. 20% down is either a really good buying opportunity or the start of a recession and a bear market. But even if it is, and you have a long time horizon, like if you're investing in a 401k right now and you're not retiring for 20 years, you don't want the stock market to be high. You want it to be low, because then you're adding money at low prices and you don't really know what the bottom is, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, one of the great miracles is a thing called dollar cost averaging. If you have a retirement fund and the market goes down, you're not going to retire for a few more years, you're getting, in effect, buying more shares. And over time, even though the market may not go up very much, with dollar cost averaging, buying on the lows, and steady amount of money, you will do very well and beat most money managers.
You'll also do very well if you watch a new program that Steve has that's coming out at a PBS station near you. It's called In Money We Trust. It all begins with money, right, Steve?
Absolutely. And if you don't get the money right, the rest doesn't matter.
It's a 1-hour documentary. It's going to be on your local PBS station, so stay tuned. It's called In Money We Trust.
Question mark.
Question mark. Do we or don't we? We'll find out. Watch the show. Meanwhile, a California sheriff ripping sanctuary laws after revealing that the alleged killer of one of his officers was in the country illegally. Former acting ICE director Tom Homan is here to respond. He's next.
He's not coming back, but there's a lot of people out there that misses him.
Suspected of killing him. Our Leland Vitter has their very latest on this extraordinarily emotional story. Leland.
Hi, David. Developments overnight. We are now at 8 arrests, 7 people who allegedly helped the accused gunman in one way or another. The sheriff says Gustavo Perez Arriaga had a rap sheet that included drunk driving arrests before killing Police Corporal Ron Singh. But because of California law, that prevented the illegal immigrant from being deported.
This is a criminal illegal alien with prior criminal activity that should have been reported to ICE. We were prohibited, law enforcement was prohibited because of sanctuary laws, and that led to the encounter with Officer Singh. I'm suggesting that the outcome could have been different if law enforcement wasn't restricted, prohibited, or had their hands tied because of political interference.
And the crying you heard during that soundbite was Singh's brother. Video from a vigil last night that was held for Corporal Singh. Police think they might have found the handgun used to kill Singh and say they have a long way to go in building their case. President Trump weighed in before the capture, saying right now there is a full-scale manhunt going on in California for an illegal immigrant accused of shooting and killing a police officer during a traffic stop. Time to get tough on border security. Build the wall. Corporal Singh was also an immigrant. He came to the United States legally and pursued his lifelong dream of being a cop, working overtime to support his young family that includes a 5-month-old daughter. His constant companion was Sam, his police dog. We are still waiting for funeral details, but Sam will be retired and allowed to live with Singh's widow and son. In the police chief's words, David, he didn't want the Singhs to lose another family member.
Leland, thank you very much. Well, so the sheriff in Stanislaus County blaming his deputy's death on California's sanctuary laws. So is he right? Former acting ICE director Tom Homan joins us now. Tom, first of all, has there ever been a more powerful argument against the whole sanctuary city anti-ICE laws?
No, I mean, this is exactly why I argued for the last 2 years against this law. I mean, the California State Sheriff's Association came out against this law before the governor signed it. They said this would happen. People would be released and the community would be put at danger and their law enforcement officers put at danger. And this isn't the only case. I mean, this is a heartbreaking case. My thoughts and prayers go out to this family. But there's been numerous people that were killed by illegal aliens released from a sanctuary jail. I got page after page after page of examples of this. This is just the latest, and it's just sad.
By the way, Officer Singh was a legal immigrant. I mean, there is a poignancy to this case that's extraordinary. The fact that this man worked so hard to first come here legally, as he did, then care for his family as best as he could, working several jobs at once, versus this illegal immigrant who came in, was identified, frankly, because he had gang member tattoos on. That was one of the ways that they were able to track him down. Remember that when the president suggested that people like this would come in, specifically mentioning the gang influence, he was dismissed by a lot of Democrats who said that was overkill. What do you think?
You know, I'm waiting for the Democrats to call for an investigation into this. I mean, they want to investigate family separation, the zero tolerance policy of the president. They want to investigate the president for everything. Where's the investigation? Let's see if they call for investigation in SB 54, is California sanctuary law, and how many people have been killed at the hands of criminal aliens because they were knowingly released from county jails rather than talking to ICE. Let's investigate. Let's have the Democrats ask for investigation on this officer and the permanent separation from his family. Not a temporary one because the parent was prosecuted on the border, but a permanent separation. Let's ask for an investigation there, but you know what? They won't have investigations. Kamala Harris, the senator from California, supports sanctuary laws. Nancy Pelosi from California, Ted Lieu, they all support this law.
Well, and it even goes beyond that,
but they're real silent right now. You don't hear a thing from them right now.
Well, one person who was speaking out earlier this week was Oakland's mayor, who actually was warning illegal immigrants about an impending ICE raid. And that led to a number of immigrants who we know were criminals escaping the grasp of ICE. For all we know, the perpetrator in this case could have been one of those that was alerted by Oakland's mayor. That even goes beyond sanctuary laws.
Well, look, are Democrats going to ask an investigation into that? I was the ICE director during that time. 800 criminal aliens that were targeted were not found. Now, I can't say she was responsible for all 800 escaping, but I got to believe many of them heard the warning and they escaped. And when I left as ICE director, several of them already reoffended. I think one was arrested for armed robbery. And look, regardless of how many people escaped because of her warning, she intentionally and knowingly put law enforcement officers at risk, telling the bad guy, hey, criminals, ICE is coming tomorrow morning and they're looking for you. Thank God one of the ICE officers wasn't ambushed or killed. I mean, so regardless of what argument she wants to put out with justification, she knowingly put law enforcement at risk. And there's no excuse for that, but I don't see an investigation into that.
We want to ask you about the wall, which of course is causing the government shutdown. How much of an effect do you think a wall would have in preventing this? Clearly, with the sanctuary laws, once they get here, once the illegal immigrants get here, they've got all kinds of ways of escaping law enforcement, but preventing them from coming here is the first step. That's really key, is it not?
Hey, the law, every place they built the wall has worked. It resulted in a decline in illegal immigration and illegal drug smuggling. Look, I'm not a politician. I'm not running for office. I spent 34 years doing this as a Border Patrol agent, as a special agent that investigated organizations that smuggle people, smuggle drugs. Yeah. I was the ICE director. I know this issue. This president, President Trump, has a 100% right on this border. I'm glad he's the president. He sees it. He's doing the right thing, and thank God he shut the government down.
Tom, I got to ask you about a statement that was just released by Governor Jerry Brown's office. This is what he told us, or they told us, quote, contrary to these claims, California law fully permits the sharing of information on dangerous gang members. Your response?
He should read his law. The law that he signed, he ought to read it. The California State Sheriff's Association, his very own sheriffs, came out and said this would prevent them from notifying ICE. They released DUIs, they released known gang members. 28 people died from DUI every day. And they're not allowed to call ICE and say, hey, I have illegal aliens here in violation of federal law that we arrested for DUI. We got to remember, these sheriffs already took this person's liberty away and locked him in a jail cell. There's no side on calling ICE. Call ICE and let us have them.
Great to see you, Tom. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it. So will the start of 2019 ring in the end of the Mueller probe? Former Whitewater Independent Counsel Ken Starr is here to discuss. That's next. President Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, calling for the investigator to be investigated. He wants to know if Special Counsel Robert Mueller helped destroy evidence. This after the Justice Department's Inspector General turned up thousands of missing text messages between former FBI employees Lisa Page and Peter Strzok. many are still missing. The IG says it was all due to a technical error. To former Whitewater independent counsel Ken Starr, he is author of Contempt, a memoir of the Clinton investigation. And there are some extraordinary overlaps, Ken, between your investigation and what we're seeing now with Mr. Mueller. And one fascinating subject about how you got President Clinton to testify before the grand jury. Of course, it was a telecommunication. It wasn't, he didn't actually go to the grand jury. They didn't actually go to the White House, but it was direct, and you got it done. So you got President Clinton to testify. I'm wondering, if you had Mr. Mueller's job right now, do you think you could get President Trump to testify?
It really depends, David, because we had a compelling interest in getting the president's testimony. It's not at all clear that Bob Mueller needs the president's testimony. In fact, from all that appears, he was happy with the written responses that were turned in several weeks ago, just before Thanksgiving. There seems to be a little bit further skirmishing and so forth, but the respect for the presidency requires, I believe, just as a matter of comity among the branches and within the executive branch, for Bob Mueller to be able to say, ultimately to a judge, I have to have his testimony, as opposed to the written responses that I have. I think it's going to be a sort of a high burden for Bob Mueller to have to surmount if he goes there, and we don't know that he is going to go there.
Now, we don't know, of course, what Mr. Mueller has in the form of evidence, but from what you've seen, is there enough evidence to justify an interview?
Not from what I've seen, no, because let's recall that from that appointment, now a year and a half ago, the charge was there collusion? And in the public record, David, we've seen no evidence whatsoever of collusion. We've seen lots of evidence, I think overwhelming evidence, of Russian interference. And those Russians should be called to task. In fact, a number have been indicted. So let's let that process run. We'll see whether we can get jurisdiction over them and so forth. I think they're going to end up being fugitives from justice. But Mueller has served a very important investigative function and public information function by blowing the whistle on the Russians, but we need to know the definitive answer. Was there, from Mueller, was there collusion? Thus far, no evidence whatsoever.
Well, you are an investigator, consummate investigator. You work with the best prosecutors in the nation at the time of your investigation. You have a way of knowing what prosecutors have and what they don't. What are your suspicions? Do you think that he is in possession of some evidence that may show collusion?
It's possible. Anything is possible, David, but I doubt it. You're giving me a lot of credit, but I am behind the veil of ignorance and not having what Mueller has in his hands. But I think we would have heard something, especially with the going forward with General Flynn and the number of steps that Bob Mueller has taken that suggest that the investigation is coming toward the end. I seriously doubt it. I doubt that there's going to be a January or February surprise, but it remains to be seen.
Well, right now, as I mentioned at the top of my introduction to you, there are calls to investigate the investigator. And coming from Rudy Giuliani, it's not surprising, coming from the president's lawyer. But there is an interesting case to be made that evidence between Lisa Page, who worked at the FBI. By the way, we showed a picture of Carter Page. That was incorrect. Forgive us for doing that. But there's Lisa Page. She worked with Peter Strzok. In fact, they had a personal relationship. Peter Strzok, of course, was dismissed after some misdoings on his part. But their messages between each other showing extraordinary bias against President Trump, some of that information was destroyed. Should somebody be held to account for that?
Absolutely. You cannot have this. Destruction of evidence is a classic form of obstruction of justice. And so we need to know the answers. I'm not sure that this means we need any sort of special apparatus. I have great trust that the Inspector General, the Office of Professional Responsibility within the Justice Department will do the job and will do it credibly. But absolutely, when this kind of allegation is made, we need to get to the bottom of it.
The IG, by the way, did say it was a clerical error, so we'll wait and see whether there should be more investigation. I want to switch again to sort of a correlation between what you were doing and what's happening now. There's a lot of media angst now about President Trump and Rudy Giuliani, his attorney, attacking the special counsel, but you had the same kind of animosity directed towards you from President Clinton. In fact, in your book, Contempt, you mentioned one case where you were directly threatened by the president's lawyer. Explain.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Before the interview and the appearance before the grand jury, President Clinton's lawyer said, if you ask essentially embarrassing questions, I will take you to the knife. Now, I took David Kendall's comment to be entirely metaphorical. I know David, he's an honorable guy. But the point is, this is rough sport, and the stakes are extremely high. And yes, our investigation, yours truly personally, constantly attacked, vilified, and the like. It's just in the nature of it. I wish it weren't so, but it was true during the Clinton years. Here's, I think, though, a very key difference. Even though President Trump tweets, I wish he wouldn't tweet to the extent that he does and saying the things that he says, but that's his business. He's the president. But on the other hand, his team has been cooperating with the special counsel. So some nasty things being said, but the right things being done. That was not true during the Clinton investigation when we had to fight tenaciously to get basic information. And by the way, constant invocations of executive privilege. And I think we're going to hear a lot about that come the new year.
All right. Well, speaking of the new year, some people wonder if this investigation will even be over by the end of 2019. Your investigation went on for a long time. You were criticized for spending money. Democrats expressed their ire about that. But has this investigation gone on too long?
I don't think that we know whether it has or hasn't. We know that it's been very productive. I mean, even with all the name calling, look at the indictments and the guilty pleas and so forth. I will bet you a nickel that Bob Mueller has his eye on the calendar because he was appointed in May of 2017. And so when we're all noting the new year and watching bowl games and so forth, I think Bob Mueller is going to be looking at mid-May and saying to the team, let's get it done.
Mid-May. We got a date from Ken Starr. His book is Contempt. It's a terrific book. It's amazing how history does at least rhyme, if not repeat itself. Ken Starr, great to see you. Thank you for being here. Well, House Democrats are reportedly beefing up on staff for all those investigations into the president. Do they risk helping the president by doing that? We'll debate it after this. Very soon. If so, will that game plan backfire on the Democrats? Joining me now, GOP strategist Ken Chase, Democratic strategist Rochelle Ritchie, and attorney Jenna Ellis. Good to see you all. So, Rochelle, whatever happened to the promises of legislate, don't investigate? A lot of Democrats were saying that a couple of months ago, not now.
Well, I think that anyone that is surprised that Democrats are seeking a team of lawyers to sort of go after Trump might be living under a rock if they're surprised by that. I'm not surprised by it. I think that we should have expected it, especially when you consider the hyperbole that's been coming from some of the Democrats, you know, Congresswoman Maxine Waters for sure, that this should not be a surprise. And so I think that what we're going to see is possibly a team of young lawyers, because one of the articles I read said that they're having some new lawyers, young lawyers, come in. I think that what we're going to see is possibly either a president resigning or a president being impeached, and I think that we need to be prepared for that.
Ken, you know, some Republicans are saying, okay, bring it on. You know, when you look at the composition of the Senate, you have more Republicans, more conservative Republicans in the Senate. Even if there is an impeachment brought by the House, it ain't going to pass by the Senate, is it?
Oh, of course not. And the American people are sick and tired of the investigations. People in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Michigan care about jobs and health care. They do not care about tax deductions in 1994 on President Trump's tax returns. That's not going to do anything for the benefit of the American people. These investigations are going to be fun for the press. The president is sitting in the Oval Office during a vacation, and Democrats won't come to the table and work with him. These investigations will be fun for the press, but they will not do anything for the American people. And voters are going to take note of that in 2020.
Jenna, Ed Rendell, who was the former Democrat governor of the state of Pennsylvania, wrote an article in Fox News back in November saying it would be a great waste of time and energy to investigate anything that is in the purview of the Mueller investigation. This is advice he gave to Democrats. Don't investigate, focus on legislating. Is there any chance that Democrats will take his advice?
Probably not, unfortunately. And I think that we saw the Democrats' priorities in the Kavanaugh hearing, that they are just so hateful against President Trump, and they're so hateful against anyone else that he's trying to nominate or anything that he's trying to accomplish. And so because their focus is so much on their own political priorities, they are forgetting the American people. They're forgetting that their first obligation is to do the duties that are and the responsibilities of Congress. And so if they're not going to come out and prioritize any legislation, bipartisanship, do anything, I mean, like we saw the First Step Act. That was a great example of prioritizing bipartisanship, doing something that was meaningful to the American people. If they're not willing to do that, I think Ken is right, that the voters will remember that in 2020, and I don't think that will bode well for the Democrats.
Rochelle, Ed is a great Democrat. I mean, he was a leader of the Democrat Party. He's kind of retired now, but he brings up a good point. If the Mueller investigation is looking deeply into something, and they've had a lot of experience in doing that, why double up on that with an investigation in Congress? Just leave it up to Mueller.
Well, I think that there's some things that Mueller is not looking at. I don't think he's
like
necessarily.
What, for example?
I don't think he's looking at President Trump's tax returns. I think that's something that Democrats are really, really interested in learning more about. So I think that's where they're going with this, especially because some of the job description and the requirements is, you know, money laundering and subpoenas and things like that. So I think that's where the Democrats are going, and they're letting Mueller do his investigation. But I think that we have to let the investigation finish. And look, Ken was right. Right now, you don't have the votes, obviously, from the Republicans in the Senate if you're trying to impeach the president.
Right.
However, I think that Republicans, it would be really hard for them not to consider it if the Mueller investigation reveals that there was some sort of criminal intent. And let's keep in mind that that the impeachment process is not a criminal process, right? It's a political one.
Political.
So you have to have the support of the members of Congress. But I think that Republicans would have to support him.
You also have to have a legal basis. I mean, this isn't just political to say that we're going to undermine the will of the American people and who they elected just because we don't like the policies of this particular president. And so for the Democrats to go after impeachment when there's absolutely no legal basis, there's nothing to say. Yeah, but it's been 2 years with the Mueller investigation. We don't know the scope of the investigation, but if there was something that he had, you know we would have known it by now.
I think that Mueller might wait. I really think we're going to be waiting for a long time because I think he wants to see what's going to happen in 2020, because the possibility of indicting a sitting president is also an issue, right? So if Trump comes out and say he does not win in 2020, is that when Mueller is going to pursue some sort of criminal
Ken, there is one group that is not waiting, and that's the American public. I mean, they're looking at all this, and frankly, I think there's kind of a fatigue about these investigations, don't you?
Of course there's a fatigue, and voters are tired of hearing about it. The only headline that's now clickbait is when will the end of the Mueller investigation be? The Mueller investigation should run its course, and he should investigate whatever he needs to investigate. There's no way to predict whether it's going to end before the 2020 election or after. My belief is that it probably will end before. There doesn't seem to be any other directions in which it can go, and we have quite a bit of time before the election. So that will be a big turning point about what happens. But as to the Democrats investigating matters that Mueller is already investigating, that should not happen, and it doesn't need to happen. So this will be corollary things, and under Rule 26 and Rule 45, it needs to be relevant to whatever litigation is ginned up to try to find Trump's tax returns. That's the holy grail that the Democrats are after, and it's a red herring. The American people don't care about it, and it doesn't benefit the lives of the American people.
Rochelle, you know, we just had Ken Starr on, and looking back at what he was doing in the investigations against President Bill Clinton, a lot of even Republicans now admit that they made a mistake in pursuing that as much as they can. Democrats actually ended up, I think, enjoying the fact that the Republicans were so determined to impeach him. And of course, he was impeached, but he was ruled innocent by the Senate.
Right.
A lot of people think it really helped the Democrats long term because the economy was doing pretty well. The economy right now is doing pretty well. When things are going well in the economy and a president who may be at least partially responsible for that is being thrown barbs by Congress, Americans get kind of upset at that. They think, why upset the apple cart?
Well, I think that there was a poll that came out that showed that the economy, normally the economy is the #1 issue when it comes to voting. But in this last midterm election, it was healthcare, immigration, and the economy. I think that we have this sort of thing just in natural human behavior that when something's going well, that's great. Now, what are you going to do for me?
Don't you worry that perhaps there could be, beyond fatigue, an actual hostility by American public about going after a president the way Republicans went after Bill Clinton in the 90s?
Well, look, I think that they should have went after Bill Clinton in the 90s as they did. I'm not that much of a Bill Clinton fan, so I'm not going to defend him. So I think they should have went after him. But I think that you have to let this happen. I mean, when you look at what Cohen said to Mueller in that report as far as being directed by Trump to, use campaign funds to pay off his infidelities and this whole relationship with Putin being a phenomenal benefit, you have to look into that.
They also had a basis to go after Clinton that they don't have with Trump.
Thank you very much, folks. Well, new worries about a flu outbreak. Are you in a danger zone? Details coming next. Now listing 9 states plus New York City is also seeing high levels of an influenza-like illnesses. So just how bad is it going to get this flu season? Joining me now is family physician Jennifer Caudill. Good to see you. Thank you for coming in, doctor. So is this an unusually high number of cases?
So, this is what I would say. Flu season typically goes from October to May, and the height of the flu season is usually now. December, January, February. So what I would say is that this is what I expect. I expect us to see and start seeing that increase, and that's what we're seeing throughout the country. So we're seeing an increase in cases. It makes sense.
Now, a lot of people will get a bad cold and wonder whether it's something more serious that requires antibiotics and the rest of it, or even a visit to the hospital.
Right.
How do you distinguish, first of all, between just a bad cold and something worse?
Flu, right. So cold and flu are different. They are different viruses. Some of the symptoms overlap, but some of the differences are when you have the flu, often there's very high fever that can last a little bit longer.
High fever meaning above what?
Well, I would say 101, 102 even. Sometimes I've seen patients with 103 fever. I mean, that's just a general range. Everyone's different, but a high fever. The other thing people feel with the flu is they feel muscle aches. You feel like a bus has hit you. You can't get out of bed. You're absolutely worn out, drained, exhausted. That is different from the cold. Those are probably the two main features, and the severity of the illness. The flu is just generally worse. You can be out of work, out of school, out of commission for 5 to 7 days with the flu, whereas maybe a cold a couple days keeps you down, but you're able to keep moving.
Now, by the way, there have been only a couple of times when I felt that, but I know that feeling.
Yes.
Every muscle in your body aches. I mean, it's just horrible. So I've had the flu, but I've resisted getting antibiotics for it because I know that all the stuff about antibiotics, a lot of it is true. You can become resistant to it if you take it too much, right?
Remember, though, in this case, the flu is a virus. Antibiotics don't work against viruses. So it's actually appropriate that none of us, if we have the flu, we should not be taking antibiotics. I think the biggest thing here
is... You just have to tough it out.
Well, getting the flu shot is really what we want you to do. Getting the flu shot beforehand, and by the way, for those who are listening, it's not too late. That will likely either prevent the flu, or if you get sick, may reduce sort of the severity of the illness. That's really what we want people to be doing.
But if you don't get or if you get the shot and you come down with the flu anyway...
It's likely to be less severe.
Okay.
And remember, a lot of this is what we call herd immunity. People don't realize that we have hundreds of thousands of people are hospitalized with complications of the flu. Tens of thousands of people die every year, so we need to protect our entire community.
Doctor, we had a dear colleague of ours. She was only 26-year-old, Bree Payton.
Yes.
She passed away yesterday, and it was because, well, a lot of the press reports say it was swine flu that might have led to meningitis, that might have led to her death. But you suggest there is a different kind of virus that might have been involved.
So I think it's important to understand that our seasonal flu influenza virus strains that are circulating, the CDC and other scientists, they try to figure out what's going to be circulating. We have the H1N1 strain, that's a seasonal strain, H3N2, and we have some B virus strains. Now that's what's in the seasonal flu vaccine that we're getting. So understand that there's an H1N1. The H1N1 that a lot of times we think about with swine flu is a variant. We We often remember that from 2009 where there was an uptick in cases, but that's a variant H1N1. So when I talk about the seasonal influenza that we're getting the flu shot against, we're getting it against H1N1, which is a seasonal strain, H3 and 2, and B viruses as well. There are additional strains of the flu virus as well. But remember, this is what we're talking about. The flu virus for some can be downright
By the way,
deadly.
we only have about 20 seconds,
Yes.
but what was scariest about Bree was she was just on camera on Wednesday, and she died on Friday. I mean, it was so quick.
Yes.
What would the warning signs be that she should have been more aware of, or that maybe we could all be more aware
Well,
of?
you know, I wasn't her treating physician, so I want to put that out there. But this is the thing is, if there were any complications of the flu, sometimes the flu can lead to other things. You mentioned meningitis or pneumonia or other things like that. It is possible to get the flu and have that kind of morph into something even more serious that causes problems. But this is the thing, for anybody out there, if you're feeling sick, if you're not getting better, if it seems particularly severe, check with your doctor.
Dr. Cottle, thank you very much. And Bree Payton, her family, all of her friends are in our prayers.